Hello, welcome back to I Got Board Game.
I got a board
I got
game.
board game. And today we are here, me, Ben.
And I'm John.
We are here with another Kickstarter preview, actually. Another game that caught my attention a couple weeks ago. And so the game we will be previewing, kind of sharing our first impressions on is.
Has to do with your digestive system. So make sure that what comes after this,
The dinosaur's digestive system or the
it's
guy's digestive
something
system?
that comes after you've been eaten.
So you've been eaten. If that background's not clear, let me just briefly share.
So you've been eaten.
Okay, that's
There you go.
the
That's what I
full
have.
cover of the game. Art by Kwanchai Moria, who I think his art is great, amazing. I'm already spoiling my thoughts a little bit. It's funny that you're also in the center of your your cover, your background.
Exactly.
Like you've been eaten. So yeah, so you've been eaten, published by Luda Creations or on Kickstarter by them right now, designed by Scott Alms, who's actually known for the Tiny Epic series of games, like Tiny Epic Kingdoms, I think was the first one, then Tiny Epic Galaxies. And there've been a lot since then, actually, like Tiny Epic Quest, Zombies, Western Pirates recently, Tactics. Um, yeah, and I think what Tiny Epic Dungeons is on Kickstarter right now too, which is cool because this designer gets to have two games on Kickstarter because it's by different publishers and basically project managers. So that's good for him. And like I mentioned, the art is by Kwanchai Moria, who has this kind of uh, pretty like identifiable style, but also has done art for games like Flip Ships and Pret-a-Porter Second Edition and some other games like that we haven't reviewed.
Soon to, maybe.
Cryptid. Anyways, I have a lot of games with his art. But getting into the game itself, uh, it is a game for 0 to 2 players, which we will mention
0
later.
players. What does that mean?
And so for now, though, we will get into a brief rundown of the rules from what we kind of discussed a little bit before this, what we saw in other impression videos, and what we kind of glimpsed from the rule book itself, which is available on the Kickstarter page. And so to get into that, to briefly give you an idea of how the game plays, we will go to the Kickstarter page. Here we are. And for now, we'll scroll past this initial stuff to at least a simple image of the game set up right here. And let me see if I can make it bigger. Nope, it's the same. Okay, so we'll go with this and how this is set up. But in this game, as 0 to 2 players, essentially one person in the 2, which is the main way to play the game, 2-player version, one player is going to be the miner who has been eaten by the other player, the beast. And what you see here, this board is essentially the digestive tract of the beast, the beast's stomach, with a tracker over here for the bacteria inside its stomach. And then on this side, this is basically the miner and his equipment. And he's in there trying to gather crystals that are inside the beast. And so the way the game will play is actually described as asymmetrical. And John and I will even actually maybe share our thoughts on if it actually is asymmetrical later on. But the general idea is the miner and the beast will play differently. They'll play alternating turns. And on the miner's turn, the miner will roll 3 dice. And then they'll use the dice by placing it onto their device over here, which is basically a spot that indicates what actions they can do. And so essentially there are three main actions. One is eliminate, which basically the beast will play stomach cards here that have bacteria on them. And so when the miner does the eliminate action, they'll play a die on that spot, and it'll target a card that many spaces away, that number of spaces away, and destroy that card, basically, that bacteria on it. One of the other actions is, what was it called? The pushing one?
Stunning.
Stunning, where then the miner can place a die and it'll target a card that number of spaces away and basically allow them to push that card back in the row as far as they want.
And then
And
shifting all the other cards forward.
yeah. And then the third main action is capture, which is the way that the miner tries to reach their winning goal, which is mining or capturing the crystal that is depicted on the given stomach card that many spaces away. And so the miner wins the game by collecting all 8 different crystals throughout the game. If they reach that, then they win. But then there are also a couple other spots that the miners can also place die, take actions. One is basically a spot to place a die that allows the miner to switch another die, a separate die, to any number they want. If they need it to be a certain number of spaces away to target something with a specific action. So that's one action. And then another one is back here. By placing a die in the back row area, it allows the miner to upgrade the corresponding eliminate, stun, or capture action to do more. And we'll get into that in our thoughts. But then after that turn goes over to the beast. And on the beast turn, they have their own deck of these orange backed cards, these stomach cards. And each one of those cards depicts a certain bacteria. There's 4 bacteria that the beasts have, like yellow, red, green, blue. It depicts the bacteria, and it could or could not depict a crystal or even a tool that the miner could possibly pick up and use. But the main idea on the beast turn is that they're going to draw from the stomach deck, and with those cards, choose the order that those cards are going to go out onto the board. And that's important because one way that the beast wins is by having a card with a given bacteria on it in the front row at the end of the miner's turn. And if there's a card with a bacteria on it in the very front of the miner at the end of the miner's turn, the miner is basically being attacked or eaten by that bacteria, which then advances that given bacteria on its own track forward 1. And once any one of these 4 bacteria reaches the end of the track, that's one way the beast wins. But then placing the stomach cards out also allows the beast to possibly get immune response cards, or basically those are upgrades that the beast can get. There's a separate deck of immune response cards, and I think 3 of them will be shown up face up at a time. And basically the beast can, in a sense, acquire them or purchase an immune response card depending on if it satisfies the requirements on the card. And those requirements will be some kind of combination of having certain specific colored bacteria on the stomach cards laid out in the track, or even have certain crystals on the cards that are out in the track. So it could be like, I don't know, maybe 2 red bacteria and 2 red crystals on the cards in that track. Then the beast can acquire that immune response card. And those are basically upgrades, which are either passive, kind of like an ongoing effect, such as maybe making the victory condition to have a bacteria reach the end of a track be 1 closer, right? Needing to go 1 less space to actually win the game. Or it can be an upgrade that activates under other circumstances, maybe depending on like what the miner does at some point. And so then that leads into the second way the beast can win, by having, if they have 5 immune response cards, 5 upgrade cards, at the start of their next turn after
Yeah.
acquiring it. And so that's another way the beast can win. And then aside from those win conditions, which are different for both players, if the beast runs through their stomach cards, like the whole deck, and neither of them have won in that way, then there's a way to score points depending on how far they are in their objectives to see who wins that way. And so, yeah, the game just goes back and forth like that. There's a few other things I can mention: the upgraded actions for the miner. There's also a hidden mutation card deck for the beast, which we'll probably get into during our first impressions.
Mhm.
So, yeah, going on to that, what are some of the things that stuck out to you, John, or things that you liked about this so far?
Yeah, so it is a very clever game for a two-player game, and as we mentioned, it is listed as asymmetrical. And I would say that according to our video, if you have not watched our IGBG explains asymmetrical, you should watch it because you'll know our thoughts about it. But this game, I do believe, is asymmetrical in how it plays. Both of the players have very unique ways of interacting with each other, even though there's common shared space and commonly shared board space. They're doing very different things with those cards and with how they activate and do actions. So the player, as we mentioned, the miner, sorry, not the player, both of them are players. The miner character, they use the dice, right? So the dice is the primary driving mechanic of how they do their actions. So effectively, they have 3 actions because they'll have 3 dice to decide on how they're interacting with the tracker board or the digestive system board, but also their mining module board, right? In effect, versus the beast, right, which is using cards, right? So they're actually doing like a card management, card placement, and a bit of a resource management and buying, you know, gameplay. So the gameplay itself is distinct, and also not just about the way that they play and the use of the components, right? Because we've even talked about in our asymmetrical review is it's right components, gameplay, and also victory conditions. Even their victory conditions are different in this game too, right? We have clear victory conditions for the players, which are not the same, right? Like as we said, the beast has 2 distinct victory conditions that are separate, and the miner has his own, or his, her, it, their own condition for victory as well that are not tied to each other in any way, not directly tied to each other, though there is a kind of end game scoring that can work, but even their scoring is done based on those objectives as well. So it's a very asymmetrical game, which is really cool because you don't really get too many of those. That kind of fits the theme and also the play of the game itself. So
Yeah, I do agree, and yeah, thank you for laying that out again. Those 3 main criteria that we went by to talk about asymmetrical games, and so yeah, following those, this does have that asymmetrical feel, and I think that's what partly like drew me to it, right? Because of how uncommon asymmetrical games are, like they're becoming more common, but then the other thing is about how well are they done, right? How, if they feel balanced. And we did watch at least one gameplay of this, right, by Before You Play. And so if you guys are interested, you guys can go over to their channel and see Monique and Naveen try the game out. And it, yeah, I think one of the big appeals is that it's asymmetrical and that it's something that you can kind of even swap roles and then have a different way of playing, and so it can feel like a new game again, right? It's a good way of adding to the replayability of the game. But then also you mentioned the theme, and that's also what really attracted me, right? It's just there's a game called So You've Been Eaten. I think that's so funny. And even some of the things on in the rule book that you can download for free on this Kickstarter, or even on the Kickstarter page itself, they have their humor in it, you know, like it's not just like a funny title and then fit a theme. Like they're kind of following it by keeping it funny. Like I think in the rule book, it kind of approaches teaching the game as like a manual for the miner, and saying stuff like, "Oh, so you've been eating? Well, that's the part of the job." And so it's kind of funny to see them do that. But yeah, very much like this different theme, this like sci-fi alien theme, but it's not like scary, right? It's not like a like Alien the movie where someone's out to kill the rest of the players, right?
Mhm.
It's very much just kind of like a back and forth. Oh, I'm a miner. Oh, but I like happen to be inside this beast. And
Mhm.
then the beast like, what? It's like trying to send bacteria to kill you. Yeah, it's interesting. And then the art, which I mentioned already before, but I'm probably going to mention a lot. I really like the style that Kwanchai Moria brings to this.
Mhm.
His style often has these bold colors, but then also the kind of shapes he uses. Um, I don't know how to describe it. It's not like super like rigid, I would say, like really weird rigid shapes, but there is like a lot of edges to
Mhm.
it, a lot of corners and angles to his
If
art. Yeah,
you
especially like
if
the
you even
monster.
see in the artwork right here, right? Like this is kind of like the main thing. Like normally you would have kind of a blend of red, right? In like kind of a maw type of setting, but he puts these little like shapes, like geometric, like rectangles and circular patterns and lines. So it kind of like you still get that blend feel, but it's not like a strict, just smooth coloring to it.
Mm-hmm,
So it
mm-hmm.
gives it a little bit of that sharpness, but also not being like too angular as well. So
Yeah, so I think it looks great. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if you had other things you wanted to say. I'm kind of just going off.
yeah, no, I mean, like if we're continuing a little bit also on the theme, it is kind of a fun theme as you mentioned before. It's very much of this like it's not fighting, right? Like you're not like battling against each other. It's not like I'm a warrior kind of space group trying to kill my aliens. It's more like, no, I'm part of this mining corporation and we just have to go in these monsters and we get eaten and we have to get these crystals and get out without dying, right? That's kind of the job, right? And then these monsters, you can kind of think of it like, oh my gosh, these people just keep coming inside and like stealing stuff from me and I want to digest them and eat them, right? Get them out of my body, expel them, right? So it's kind of a slightly different take on this. As we were saying, like a lot of times this tends to be a very horror style. So it's kind of a humorous way, a different kind of humor, but still kind of competitive edge between like monsters and people. I'd say maybe the most closest thing that's somewhat comparable in a video game these days with mining and stuff is a Deep Rock Galactic, which is like dwarves going on planets and mining, and then these aliens basically attacking the dwarves. So it's like sort of like that, but not the same as this game. That's like the closest comparison to this being a part of this like sci-fi style. So it's a pretty fun design.
And so then before we go back to the mechanics, which I think we'll maybe want to talk more about, like, the upgraded actions and stuff like that, and how that makes a difference to the pacing of the game. The small detail I do want to mention that's clever and probably also caught a lot of people's attention is how we said, and the Kickstarter page says, it's a game for 0 to 2 players.
Mhm.
And it's probably the first game that's, advertising something like that. And then you can see on the Kickstarter page here, it explains, right, like the 2-player mode that we've been explaining, the miner versus the beast. And then there's the 2 1-player modes where you can play it solo as the miner against a hibernating beast or as the beast against a robot miner. And so they'll have their own kind of decks and rules on how to automate that for you. And then 0 players, a hibernating beast versus a robot miner, or essentially both of the bots that we just described in the 1-player mode set up
Playing
against each
together.
other. And you're basically just running the game for 2 automated systems, which John and I had mentioned before this to each other. It makes sense, right? Like solo games have definitely gotten bigger in the board game industry. And so there's, kind of its own uh, kind of like group of people who really enjoy solo games. But then, if you think about it, a solo game is a game that includes one automated player at least, right?
Mhm.
And so if you have an automated player, what if you just put an automated player against another automated player? like, couldn't that work? And so that's what they did here. It's just two automated players against each other, and you get to kind of run it for them and watch what
See who
happens.
wins.
Which, I don't know. I think part of it is kind of gimmicky, of course, right? Of like catching people's attention by saying 0 players can play. But then I think it could be kind of interesting to just try out at least once,
Yeah.
just to see how it feels. Hopefully it's not too complicated to run both, automated parts. And so yeah, then you can just kind of enjoy like the randomness that happens, like you're watching some kind of show like this.
Yeah, and it's also cool because like typically in games where they have automated players, the rule set either is just kind of moving the boards that you play on, like in these typical games of just having actions happen within the game, or like it's almost like these set movements that always occur in a particular way. But in this game, it is a little bit different with the way that they set it up with the automated ones. So again, we haven't really played with it. I don't think we've seen it directly on how it works, but it also kind of takes away a little bit of the thinking, right? So like if you do want to just kind of see the game played out without really having to think about it or kind of make decisions, having a 0 player version is kind of a fun way of just seeing how it goes. So
Yeah, I
for
mean,
those days where you use your brain too much.
I think it would be curious to see, like, since it's automated, like if one side will just be doing random dumb decisions, but then as like if you're into this game, that could even be a way to see like, oh, like this is a moment where I would do this action where the bot is doing this, like that's not good. I should like not do that when I'm actually playing. So that would be interesting again to just maybe try out.
Mhm.
But obviously not the main purpose of the game.
Or is it because it is sold as a 0 player game?
Yeah, they designed it that way, meant it to be 0 players first.
That's all it's for. The
And so
first of its kind.
getting into as I've been scrolling, trying to show you guys some of the components, relevant components while we've been talking about different points. We'll kind of go through. This is the basic component. So there are 3 versions, 3 levels you can pledge at. A $29 one, which is the basic version, and then there's a premium version for $39, and then a collector's edition at $49. So $10 more, $10 more. And so, but we'll try to get to showing you these differences in components later on. But getting back to some of the mechanics and showing the relevant components that kind of bring it to mind. Something I did want to say on that with the mechanics is when you were talking about the theme, right, and the kind of beast fighting the miner, I think something clever, a small detail that's clever about this is that even though it's the beast trying to attack and get rid of the miner, like I think the most basic way to do that would have been like some kind of hit point system, right, for the miner. But that could in one way be too simple, too simplistic, and in another way be too combative for people,
Mhm.
knowing that like I have a life gauge and I'm actually like dying, you know. And so to make it slightly maybe more friendly or
Mhm.
even Euro game like, right, less combative, is the bacteria tracks,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's a clever way of doing it differently, right? I think having this bacteria track, it's still, you could still see it as kind of like a hit point thing, right? Like this bacteria hit you this many times and you got hit by this one this many times, so you took this many hits. But ultimately it's different, right? Because it doesn't come down to number of hits, but specifically which bacteria have basically hit you and grown enough
Mhm.
to basically get rid of you, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's a small decision that's smart with the from a standpoint of like how to make the game feel a certain way, right? More Euro than like Ameritrash or combative.
Mhm.
But then in doing that, it also opens it up to not just being linear and like, this many hits, then you lose and I win. But now there's 4 different tracks, and so I could hit you like what, 3 times 4. I could hit you 12 times and still not win.
Mhm.
Or if I plan it well, I can hit you 4 times and just win. Right. And I think that variety and way that it gives you that openness and how you're trying to achieve that goal is a smart design decision.
Yeah. And kind of piggybacking off that a little bit too, it is also it's also a good way of tracking too, because it's not purely hit points, because that's another way that they could have done it. But the fact that if you notice on the board, there's some stars on top. So we mentioned that there is a scoring component that could happen in the game. So one of the things obviously that the miner could be doing throughout the game is mitigating and kind of being like, okay, I'm gonna get hit or infected, so many times by these different levels of bacteria. So it's not enough for me to die, but I'm kind of like, for example, maybe I do it so that I get hit 12 times. So that means I'm still alive, right? But then what you are, risking at that point is that if you get to that point, you're probably close to the end game because the cards are probably running out in the monster deck. So at the end, when you do the scoring, these hit point trackers or this life point total is not just a matter of like life points and that's all it was used for. It's also used for score at the end of the game. So the more hits effectively, or the more times that the miner's been infected, means that there's a higher chance for the monster to win, because basically they have been forcing the miner to take on more and more infections at this point, or get it hit more and more by this bacteria. So you get a little bit of that balance too, of like, it's not just a matter of just having life points and then just as long as I don't die, I'm fine. You also have to be careful that, you could let the beast player could win because you didn't achieve your objective, or you let them get too many points, right? So that they're going to score better than you at the end of the game.
And so then that also does bring to mind the idea of balance, right? Which makes me curious. Obviously, with an asymmetrical game, that's already a question that comes to mind of if these roles that play differently are actually balanced together. But then in this case too, right, when we've been talking about what you just said and even the initial rules, how the beast has 2 win objectives, right? 2 ways to win, where the miner only has the one of getting crystals. It's interesting to think if that's actually balanced, because then I think that might also lean into something that, I guess this is, I don't know if we're strictly talking about just positive stuff right now, just our impressions.
Just impressions, so it can go negative.
But yeah, because one thing I had mentioned to you very briefly before we started this was the idea of how the 2 roles feel different, right? Where in at least the video I watched and maybe just thinking it through in my head or imagining it, the gameplay seems like the miner is more actively playing than the beast, where the beast, their actions are very much about setting up the track, right? And using that to get some kind of passive upgrade, or just setting it up in a way that they think the miner won't be able to deal with it on the coming turn. Where then the miner is more active, with whatever dice they roll, they need to plan out, okay, I'm going to be attacking this card, or I need to push this back, or I need to upgrade now and do a big action, And so I feel like maybe what we were just talking about with the beast maybe getting more points as the game goes on and hitting the miner more and having the additional win objective, it makes me think, is that because the beast is more passive in a way of
Yeah,
placing?
and I had been thinking about kind of the difference of the players, where I think the minor player is kind of your standard, as you said, active kind of player in a board game, someone who's very much of the, I am dealing with what is coming at me, right? In traditional board games, like that's typically what you'll see. It's usually there's a situation that presents itself and you have to react to the board because something is happening. And the way that I look at the beast player is there are some other video games and other kinds of games that have come out where the way you think of the beast, or the way I think of it, is like you're more of like the dungeon master, right? Where you're kind of setting up the situation in the scenario, you're putting traps together, you're setting the difficulty up for the player. But in this case, you're actually actively trying to make sure the player dies in this circumstance, right? Where you're actively seeking ways in which you're going to make it impossible for the other player to survive or the other player to succeed so that you can win the game in the end, right? So it's kind of like you're playing like the monster plays as a very, so to speak, defensive player, which thematically is almost, to me makes sense too, because it's the miners that are coming in trying to take stuff out, right? And then leave versus, so you should be more defensive, right? You're in a sense more passive or reactionary in that way. And then the miner being the more active player trying to figure out, how do I survive all of these pitfalls and all of these traps that are being set up, or these circumstances that this malevolent being is actively trying to put in place to get me dead, right? But I also think that's why, from a win condition way, it's more important to have the miner only have one particular objective to succeed with, because if they had more objectives, it would be harder for the passive player or the player who has less direct interaction to be able to prevent that scenario from happening, versus the miner, while they have to hit their win condition, is now also having to manage the passive win conditions that the monster is now achieving. So they're the ones who do kind of have that sense of also kind of like, because you're the active player, you do need to figure that out. And then the monster, being the passive defensive player, is setting up circumstances to try to make it, to make the trade-offs more favorable for them to win in the long run.
No,
so it's kind of this different, it is a different way of thinking about it, but I think that's the beauty of this asymmetry. It's, you're not playing the same, and you aren't both taking an active role in the game in that way. Otherwise, you may, that to me sometimes is what we talked about in asymmetrical games, is the danger of, is it really an asymmetrical game? Because they end up doing the same things. So
yeah, no, I think that's a good point too, about how it's this kind of asymmetrical game that allows those different approaches basically to the game, right? Where with other asymmetrical games, even like when I think now of Root, which we love,
that I haven't played yet,
which I love, even though that's like a highly is the word touted, highly acclaimed asymmetrical game, right? Modern asymmetrical game. It's still one where everyone is active, right? Everyone is still basically pushing forward in furthering their goal in the woodlands, right? Or whatever map you're playing on. Where then, yeah, this kind of asymmetrical game then seems to not only obviously be asymmetrical mechanically, but then even change up the feel that both sides have, one more active, one more passive. So I think that's interesting. That does make this more appealing, I think, as an asymmetrical game. But then also, in talking about the beast and their immune response cards, which here's some of the examples of it. I think this part and the miners upgrades are interesting to also talk about, because these, actually for both of them, they can get their upgrades obviously in different ways. And when you have upgrades in a game, I think that usually feels pretty great, right? A game that lets you like get stronger in this kind of either big way or ongoing way. But then the interesting thing with it, which I don't know if it'll feel good or bad, is that for both players, the upgrades are not permanent, right? There's ways that the miner can remove the immune response cards that the beast gets, which is basically through upgrading the miner's, was it eliminate action? Right, when they upgrade the eliminate action and then use the upgraded version, they not only get to destroy bacteria on, or basically remove a certain card, and actually they get to remove an immune response card.
I think for that one, you don't get to do both. I think you choose.
Oh, you choose.
One,
okay.
Right? You do.
Yeah,
I think in that circumstance, you do choose one, because I think it would be too strong if you got to do both.
That's
but
true.
The idea, yeah, is that they can destroy the immune response, because that's a victory condition, right?
Yeah. And so that's a way to prevent the beast from winning that way. But I think, and then from the beast side, right, when the beast has a certain stomach card in the front, a certain bacteria in the front of the track, at the end of the miner's turn, that's the one that attacks the miner. But then also there is a small deck, this hidden mutations deck, of cards, which are basically corresponding to the 4 bacteria.
Mhm.
The beast can basically choose to try to guess basically every turn by putting one of those hidden mutation cards face down onto their side of the board. And if they basically guess correctly which bacteria is hitting the miner on at the end of the miner's turn, then they get to also downgrade or remove one of the upgrades that the miner already has, right?
Or a crystal if they don't have any upgrades at that point.
Hmm. And
So,
so I think that's an interesting detail to the mechanics where you have upgrades for both sides, but they can lose them, right?
mhm,
And what that makes me think of immediately is, in one way, I feel like it would take away from the actual feeling of an upgrade. Obviously, when you use the upgrade, you'll feel it, right? But then part of what I think makes upgrades fun in games is how permanent they are, right? That
mhm,
that you reached it, and so now you've permanently kind of changed and become better in this way. But then I can also understand that in this game, it doesn't the upgrades don't, in a sense, follow the same feel as upgrades in like grander games, right?
mhm,
Because it is this kind of back and forth game, being 2 players and like contained to the board and the track and such. And it's not like, big economic games where you're competing businesses and you have this whole board of different places to set up, and maybe you'll get an upgrade that helps you set up faster or spread your business faster or stuff like that, right? It's a different kind of genre games that then have upgrades that are more permanent and specialized in a certain way of playing.
mhm.
Since this one is just this back and forth, I think it, in a sense, makes sense, right? That
Yeah.
the upgrades can come and go.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's one of the ways of like solving, or like one of the things in two-player games is like how much interaction do you have with other players in the setting, especially because it's a two-player, right? So it's only like you're only interacting effectively with one player. So there does need to be this kind of back and forth tug of war that goes on, because if you think of the more kind of traditional permanent upgrade style, what tends to happen with that if it's permanent upgrades is like you kind of like the idea is that you're snowballing, or you're kind of growing and you're building up your engine, or you're building up the speed in which you're able to gather, collect, and get into larger and grander scale activities. Versus in this kind of game, because it's supposed to be kind of a tug of war, if that starts happening with one player's side, if the other player doesn't equally have that same balance that occurs, then the snowball tends to be too fast, and that player typically would always win the game. So I think it's one of those things where you don't put that into the game that way a lot of times, or it makes it easier for balance, so that it's then you have an opportunity to get back into the game, right? Where it's like you can force the player to lose something, right? Or they could have gone another way where it's like one-time use powers, but then that's something that you would have to keep re-getting over and over on a more
Mhm.
consistent way, which means that you'd have to add a, like, in the action economy of a game, right? You would have to balance around. So I think this way, by making it semi-permanent upgrades, that they're losable but not necessarily immediately lost unless something triggers that condition, right, is a nice way, because then it's like it forces the other player to use up something to do it, in a way, in a sense. So then then there's a chance to get back in the game.
Yeah,
So
so that you can control the snowballs.
exactly,
Two
right. You can
snowballs coming at each other.
get a flamethrower and burn it. No, just
But
kidding.
no, no, I mean, what you said makes sense too about like using that kind of way of talking about it, like the snowballing effect, right? Where also I think the other part from like a design standpoint is, like you were saying, like if one player could snowball in their upgrades, right? Uh like the other side would either have to be able to match that easily or be
Mhm,
automatically caught up to that. Or I think the other issue though with one side being able to snowball is it makes a 2 player game specifically one in which you might have to snowball to keep
mhm.
up, right? Like to design a game, like, if it's, for one player, oh, you can get 1 point easily, and then maybe you upgrade and you can start getting 2 points at a time easily, right? And then like obviously if it's not controlled, that person can rank up points really quickly or at a really fast rate. And so then how do you keep the other side equal? Well, if you give them the equal ability, the other thing you have to be aware of then is that what is the actual limit you set for the game, right?
Exactly.
And
Yep.
so if you set the game too low, then if one side snowballs early, then it's over. But then if you're trying to keep it competitive and even keeping both sides snowballing together, then you have to set a really high point limit, like 100 points or 500 points. And then, but then if you set it that high, you also set it up so that then both players have to snowball at some point,
Mhm.
right? Or if they just play the game without snowballing, then the game takes
Take
way too long,
forever.
right? And so it does seem kind of like a smart in between path to have a game like include upgrades in this way, then, so that it doesn't deal with those issues that come with snowballing happening in a two-player game.
Mhm. And kind of getting back into the end game conditions and the win conditions, I also like that the game's end conditions really aren't really tied to points, which is nice. While that is an end game condition and trigger that can happen, the actual primary win conditions for both players is not a point based victory, which kind of incentivizes you to actually do your objectives because it's a straight victory, right, for you, and you don't have to worry about these points. Right. And I think we've even talked about it a little bit in asymmetrical games, right? When we talk about the end goal expectations of like what makes it asymmetrical or not. If points are the end game, does like aim for players, there is something that ties you together in some way, right?
Mm.
It's kind of a similar tie versus in this game, it is a condition, but it's not the primary victory conditions. So you're not really incentivized to push for points in this game,
Mhm.
which means that you're actually kind of playing the game for what you're supposed to be. And in this game too, like you do get points based on actually aiming for the proper win conditions anyway. So you're not it's not really a again, right? That's not the primary focus of winning the game. It's just when you kind of get to the point where the game is exhausted, it's like, okay, you can't keep playing. This is how you end it, right?
Yeah,
Which
and
is
I think that's also kind of a smart design choice where, the other alternative I think that comes to mind would have been if the beast runs through their stomach deck, just reshuffle the discarded ones and then keep playing, right? But then games that do that either need to be short already so you don't keep reshuffling your deck, right?
Mhm.
Or basically, yeah, they run into the issue where this game could drag on forever because there's no other end condition and we're just going to keep shuffling the deck if we stalemate each other with our actions each turn.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
And so then showing here just some of the stuff we've been mentioning, the 8 crystals that the miner needs to collect. They need to collect all 8 different ones. So these crystals will show up on multiple cards, right? Like multiple stomach cards could have this purple crystal on it, but collecting it more than once doesn't do anything, right, for the miner in reaching their end game objective. They need to collect all 8 different ones.
Mhm.
And then there's also the 4 bacteria that the monster needs to hit the miner to advance on their own tracks to win. And then even going back up here, these are kind of the upgrade tiles, which I think is kind of interesting to see they did it this way, where they have these weird shapes to them because they actually fit over those parts of the miner's rig, I believe, or
Mhm.
device, this side of the board. Right, those pieces, those 3 pieces fit here, here, and here on the left side of the device.
Mhm.
And so it's just a clever way of doing the production, right, versus just being like, I don't know, you how holding some cards that are your upgrades, you
Yeah.
actually show it on the board but cover it up and
Mhm.
then uncover it once you get it, and then even cover it up again when you lose it.
Mhm.
It's also a nice little way of doing the components to show the upgrades for the miner.
And it's nice because we've talked about components being different too. It kind of focuses that the miner's primary kind of component is that piece of the board, right? Like that is the thing that is being upgraded, or like the equipment. I think there's a little funny note that they have on the bottom about whether it's called equipment or whether it's called an upgrade and what the card actually represents. But that's kind of the idea. Is like that's the terminal that is being upgraded, right? And so you take off the tile to show that it's upgraded. So it's the module, the terminal that you're working on that is actually upgraded, right? Versus just, as you were saying, being a random card in your hand or some other thing that sits on the side, right? It actually fits to the piece that you're putting the dice on. So it actually shows when you're doing the action. So I think that's a nice, clever thing that they did as well. And
Yeah,
there's their quip about it.
yeah, the joke you mentioned there, they just include these little. Okay, so these are actually the tiles that note that equipment is not upgraded,
Yep.
even though they're called upgrade tiles.
So
there was way more debate about this than you might expect. It basically took us a few months to figure this out.
so they know too.
And so that's what everything looks like in the basic edition, right? These are all cardboard punch outs, these bacteria, crystal token. But then moving on to the premium edition, you have everything in the basic version. So you see it all again here, more condensed together. But then you have these custom shaped, double-sided, screen printed acrylic crystal tokens, which look nice. That actually looks pretty cool, I think.
It's shiny different. AF.
It's I mean, it's different than doing like, cubes, right? Like that's kind of what I expected. Is like, oh, the nice version from upgrading up from a punch board crystals will be like cube versions, and it's like, yeah, okay. I mean, maybe if they were also custom shaped, I guess. But these then are actually like custom shaped and like shiny, which is fitting. And so that's a nice upgrade. And then upgrading the bacteria from cardboard to wood, that makes sense. So you could still have nice screen printed art on it. I don't think like a clear acrylic germ would have been smart.
Yeah, plus they use similar colors. So
yeah, like you want the two different sides components to also feel and look different immediately, right? And so this is nice. Wood is still nice, right, in this case. Then you have a custom shaped robot miner for the solo mode. Just an indicator, I guess, for maybe the actions that it does. And then there's a mini expansion, Dyspepto Beast Mall. And so that's the premium version. That's $10 up from the basic version, which is $29. And then $10 more up from the premium 39 to 49. You have the collector's edition, which is then everything from before. And now you have a triple layered double-sided board, which is interesting because the original is supposed to be double-sided. And I'm not actually sure what the other side is like. I don't know if it's.
I think the other side is the automated side, if I remember.
Oh, okay. And then essentially then they're doing a double layered, double-sided board, basically, right? That's what this actually is, right? A triple layered. It's basically two double layered boards just on each other side. But still, double layered boards are very nice, right? Having actual slots that fit your pieces in. Like you can see it for the tracks for the bacteria here, but then particularly for the miner's module, right? These are all like raised barriers now. So then the upgrade tiles will fit in here. And they even changed those to these red ones, which is the part that I'm actually not too sure about. Like it's nice that they're chunky now. So then it's, even more easy and comfortable to fit into this double layered board. And but then it doesn't have the nice kind of like, gray or negated symbol on it. But then part of, I think, what they say here too is that they chose these to be see-through and red so that, it is red. So it like sticks out as like, this is disabled. You can't do this.
Yeah.
But then it's clear so that you could still see through what your upgraded action would be, which that actually I think is pretty smart. Oh, and it comes with a dice tower, custom dice tower. And this part, tuck boxes, that surprised me. Tuck boxes is like not a common component like premium component. Like if the game actually consists of tuck boxes, sure, but to then include custom tuck boxes in a game, that's interesting to me. They look
And the
nice.
sleeves fit.
Yeah, and they fit sleeves. Those are great. When tuck boxes fit sleeve cards like perfectly, that feels great. But I think this could be nice, like to have a storage system that comes with the game, basically, right?
Mhm.
Versus having to figure out how you're gonna keep the cards separated and sorted in the box.
Mhm.
And a beast die. I think this is probably for the solo mode against the beast. And then a bigger box, UV coated. So yeah, so that's like the collector's edition. Uh, the tuck boxes, yeah, I think this is a very interesting touch that they're adding that. Uh, but yeah, aside from that, I don't know, John, if you had any other thoughts you wanted to share.
No, I think as we mentioned, I think we're pretty excited about this game. It seems like a pretty fun two-player experience. We did talk a lot about rules, but it's actually pretty simple. It's not that complicated to learn. After you kind of go through it a couple times, it makes a lot of sense. It's pretty intuitive. As we said, a lot of the, I think they were very smart, and they really thought through the design and how it looks and all of that. So all the pieces, it's pretty straightforward about what exactly things do for the most part, right? And what symbols mean, what they stand for. So if you are, interested and you enjoy playing two-player games, and you have like either somebody, a significant other that you play games with regularly, or like at your gaming, like during your gaming sessions and stuff, if it's just, you and one other person, or even if you have a group of people, and sometimes you have that kind of breakout of like smaller groups of people playing games, and you have a weird number of people, this is a great kind of side game to have to play, or it seems like a great side game to have, because we don't have it, it's not out yet. So
Yeah, I mean, I do think like even just being mainly a two-player game that appeals to me, because I think, after trying more two-player games like a few years ago, it really hit me how two-player games, since they're only balancing for two players, I feel like they're the kinds of games that can be really creative with what they do,
mhm.
right? Where then the more players you have to account for, then the more balancing you have to do, and then maybe you'll end up having actions feel more similar or have players do the same things, right? And so I think two-player games are where they have a lot more possibilities of doing different things.
Mhm.
But then also, I would want to point out again the different pledge levels, right? If you guys find this game interesting and want to back it, the basic one being $29, I think that's actually a very good price. Like if you uh, are the type to, be in the board game industry, buy a lot of games or buy games often, we've often mentioned kind of price points in our videos, and how $20 is, people would usually want a board game for $20, right? Especially when they're new to the industry. They're like, it's like, oh, why is this game like $40? Why is this $50? Like, we're
60,
like the $20
80
games, and $20 is very uncommon unless you're
nowadays.
getting like very small games. And so like I think more of like an average price for like a decent size and weight game, even if it's like a family game for multiple people or a deeper game for like two players, is around $30.
Mhm.
And so I think this is a really good price uh, for something that I think looks this great and sounds this interesting. And then it'll kind of be up to you how much you care about having like the nicest components, right? Like going $10 more to $39 for the premium, which then does include those like nicer acrylic pieces, right? Which I think is a really good step. And but then it's kind of up to you if you care about having chunkier pieces versus, just playing with cardboard and that's enough.
Mhm.
And then even $10 more to get I would say the main things would be the triple layered board, or the double layered, double-sided board, and maybe like the tuck boxes, maybe the acrylic tiles. But it's kind of, yeah, up to you if you actually want those extra things like the tuck boxes and the dice tower.
Mhm.
uh Yeah, because admittedly, actually, for me, like the acrylic shapes, at least these upgrade tile ones, don't matter that much, I think. And then I usually don't care about dice towers. It's even though it's custom, it's nice looking and fitting with the game, but then it's also kind of just a way to roll dice. So I don't know if I usually care about those. But for me, like the tuck boxes are nice, and especially the triple layered board is very nice.
Mhm.
So I mean, as you can see, I am currently backing it at the collector level. We'll see if I'm still there at the end of the campaign, but at least for now, that's at least where I think I would be interested in backing this game at. But yeah, up to you guys to see what components actually matter to you and make a difference to you with the game. And so, yeah, with that, I hope you guys have found this interesting. And if you actually did find the game interesting, that you'll actually check out the Kickstarter here for more details. They still have 17 days to go. And I actually am a little surprised that they aren't funding more from what we've seen of the game, especially since the other game I mentioned that's on Kickstarter by Scott Alms right now, Tiny Epic Dungeons, is at like 1.5 million. But probably because of the whole Tiny Epic name to it and that
Yeah.
series of games. But still, if you found this interesting, hope you'll check it out. If you found what we've been talking about, all the details and our thoughts on it, we hope you'll share this video with friends, family, people you play board games with. Hope you'll consider subscribing to this YouTube channel, following us on Instagram at I Got Board Game. And until next time, we will see you then. Bye.
Bye.